Today, we're going to be talking about the data cloud implementation and how to plan it to achieve success. There's been a lot of discussions and debates over the last few years. I think there have been a lot of product evolution, but there still seem to be a certain level of uncertainty after talking with a number of customers, especially in the last 6 months, since me and my partner Rich left Salesforce, and we're kind of seeing that there's still an opportunity to share how to approach the implementation planning in order to build up success overall. So that's the aim for today. We're going to have a bit of a time to talk through, the actual planning and structure, but at the same time, there is a bit of a time for Q&A. So if you did your homework and you came up with any of the questions that you'd like to be answered, we certainly will try to make sure that we're leaving nothing unanswered today altogether. Obviously, would love to appreciate your time for coming up and joining the discussion. We're going to present for roughly 40 minutes and then open up the floor for any questions. But if something comes up throughout the session and you'd like to just chime in or ask for clarification, please, as usual, feel free to do so. We really appreciate your timing and certainly want to make sure that you make it worthwhile for you. A bit of a background from my end, because I've seen quite a lot of familiar faces, mostly the people I know, so great, and it's fantastic to see you all. But my background was effectively coming up why we're doing that and why it would be hopefully interesting and useful for you to listen to me. I've been, before starting with carbonx, I've been with Salesforce for 11 years, and I started my professional journey there as a practice lead for marketing cloud delivery services, and then transitioned into what we refer as alliances and channels group. And the focus within a number of roles I've performed over the period of time was really helping our partner ecosystem to get upskilled with different products. My major sort of focus was around marketing portfolio, and then as data cloud came to life, I was lucky and privileged to effectively take a leadership role and lead the entire enablement program build, building up the certification, the first few iterations of that, growing the team who then took over, and we kind of expanded our exposure to enable all our consulting and implementing partners, as well as Salesforce employees, which was really fantastic. And then with the time, that role transitioned into more of a delivery lead for global representation. When we talk to partners, we support on some initial implementations, and this is where majority of my learnings and practical knowledge comes from, because I've seen things that did work well across the globe, things that completely failed, and all the learnings that we kind of draw from that with a pretty good forum from product team, from our success architects team, from us within the enablement group, and so forth. So it was fantastic amalgamation of really taking all these different points of views and kind of building out the program that really helps our consulting ecosystem to deliver success. So today, it's great to see that I know like some of the custom names. I've seen some of my ex-colleagues. I've seen my partners on the call, so fantastic, and see some of the friends from the ecosystem too. So hopefully we'll share something new to you today if you haven't seen that. But at the same time, be mindful that we more or less, not the competition, I think we all have a really good play, but if there is something outside of what is not covered today, feel free to always reach out to us, and we certainly can help you to take the learnings from today forward. A little bit about the carbonx, because again, as I said, it's a relatively new venture. Me, Rich, and Ian, three of us decided to start our own company about 6 months ago. It's kind of hard to believe that it's been 6 months, but ultimately the big value that we took analyzing, and we all worked across different streams within the Salesforce, but we sort of saw the opportunity that a lot of brands, a lot of companies purchase and make a lot of investment into technology, but unfortunately very few successfully implement and take advantage of all of that stack. So we thought that it would be a great opportunity for us to actually come in and start focusing on specifically adoption of the products, adoption of technology, and helping you as a customer to become self-sufficient. And that's where that whole sustainability idea came up, where you are self-sustainable within your technology stack. And we initially started looking into data and marketing, but as we sort of evolve and grow, we're looking obviously into expanding into broader technology and looking into like security, privacy, core and outside of Salesforce opportunities in the future. We heavily focus on enablement, and that's one of the things that why we're doing these specific programs. I've done a fair share of these enablement programs when I was at Salesforce, and I would love to continue doing that as we go into this next year forward, to continue sharing the knowledge and experience with whether it's customers or partners, doesn't really matter. So for today, I'll do three kind of key sections of the presentation. Significance of data cloud in a modern architecture within Salesforce ecosystem. So I'll talk a little bit about that. We'll move into successful planning of the projects and what framework that we sort of collated together can enable you to achieve as you start sort of planning yours, if you're doing that. Some of the key takeaways to summarize it, and then we'll open up the floor for discussions and questions. So let's try that. Before we start, I did prepare the poll, so bear with me. Let's see how this one works. Just curious if you can answer where you are in the data cloud journey, so as we sort of better understand who is represented here on the call today. It's good to see at least someone is new to the data cloud and planning the first implementation. That's awesome. Fantastic. A few people implemented data cloud before, as I would expect it to be. That's fabulous. A and B, fair enough, Camille. And that's a good thing to do. No doubt, Elliot. I would expect that. So Neil as well. Thanks for joining today as well.
Glad I'm just going to help everyone out. If you haven't seen in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, there's a little triangle, square, and circle button. And if you click that, you can participate in the poll as well. I think some people are just putting in the chat with the D and whatever else, but there's actually a little poll function for you all.
No, that's cool. That's all right. Thank you very much. That's yeah, that's good. It's great to see. So we've got a bit of representation from all the different backgrounds, but there's enough people who are kind of new to the data cloud, and that's the good thing, because hopefully it is primarily focused on people who are new, but at the same time, for everyone who's got a bit of experience and working on the project, you'll find something useful for you today as well. So I appreciate that. Let's see how we go. So Fuel for the next generation platform, I look into, there was a blog post on Salesforce Australia at some point in time, talking about the data cloud is really powering up a lot of kind of future solutions within Salesforce ecosystem. And taking one aspect out of that was really kind of looking into that report, again, performed by Salesforce, State of Data and Analytics, that highlights the fact that 94% of business leaders today feel that the organization should be getting more value out of its data. And I'm assuming that it is fairly true, given the fact that, again, we spoke with a number of customers, we talked to a number of partners within the ecosystem, and it's a common share that the value of data is here. There's a lot more to be said and done about it, but there's a number of challenges that majority of leaders face today. And looking into specifically Australian market, here are some of the highlights of what are the top problems that leaders face when it comes down to business breakdown and IT and analytics, which I find interesting because they do represent quite a lot of functional areas that data cloud specifically aim to address. The things that kind of strike to me, and that's probably a very common representation, that single source of truth. I think it's been spoken about for so many years. If you think about Salesforce 20 years back onwards, kind of like coming to today's times, there's so many different variations of what single source of truth could be within the Salesforce ecosystem. And then let alone all other items like complexities with integration. The data often becomes stale and outdated, and more modern problem, which is volume of data, because it's significantly much higher than we used to have. Mind you that there are some tools that come and help with handling some of that around AI to tackle it differently. But at the same time, what was interesting is that Data Cloud was positioned by Salesforce really well to become almost like the backbone and heart, if you will, pumping up all the lifeblood in form of data into the applications and effectively all the agentic experiences in the future. So the key value of Data Cloud as that presented today is kind of looking into three key pillars as I break them down. Number one is really breaking down the data silo. So connecting varieties of different data sources, structured, unstructured, and then bringing it all together into the trusted context. So you've got ability to unify that and harmonize, meaning that you have standard data model that you can connect to and start fueling all of that information into the acting is the next big thing, and it's really, in my opinion, and again, it's based on so many different variations and feedback and looking into other tools as well, is ability to act on data by literally surfacing it within the business level and business line applications. The advancement in the recent couple of years within Data Cloud capabilities, bringing up truly within the platform, integrating into the triggers and workflows, meaning that business processes can now be infused with data and initiated through data, which is completely different to a lot of other tools that really focus on collecting and organizing the data altogether. And with advancement of Agentforce, no doubt you've heard it so many times by now, that its ability to ground and to contextualize all the AI interactions in the flow of work for the end users. So when we talk about Salesforce ecosystem, when we talk about agents and agentic experiences, a lot of references would be made to the data, whether it's again structured or unstructured, but ultimately providing an opportunity for agentic experiences to be infused with information that comes from the Data Cloud, and again, which in turn comes out from varieties of different sources. So the interesting thing about Data Cloud, and I'm not going to drive into very deep into technical capabilities today. It's not really the objective of the session, but it's more it's the opportunity to easily connect and ingest the data. There is more than 200 different connectors available today in the market, and then ability to connect structured and unstructured, as well as zero copy data that kind of comes into the platform. So there's quite a few opportunities to not revolutionize and replace all the systems of information that you might have within your ecosystem and stack, but truly take advantage of the existing investment and bring them into the flow of work. So that kind of brings me up to the point of like not so secret recipe for success, and that's where number of times when we talked about Data Cloud, I would always refer to that slide because it really resonated early days with me, and it was in contradiction with initial go-to-market motions from Salesforce, where it was just bring all the data into the platform and then figure out what you want to do with that. I found that Data Cloud, and that really heavily helped in my kind of understanding and realization of that was my marketing background, is you always start with end in mind. It's like, what are you trying to achieve before trying to put technology into place? So Data Cloud is always the exact same principle, because one fascinating insight that recently was shared with me was that every Data Cloud project really starts without Data Cloud, or at least it should. Because if you really think about that, like it's a bit of a controversial point because we're referring to the product, but we really need to be asking the question of what problem am I trying to solve and why? So if you disassemble that statement, if you think about what does it actually expose and why would you ask it that question, and where it leads to is thinking about framing the business use case, that part of that forms the technology aspect. So if I kind of look into what is represented here, at the organization level, you do want to ensure that any investment that you make is aligned with the business strategy, vision, and values. And that really is where that thinking about like, why am I doing, or why am I trying to introduce something that's a piece of technology or particular business outcome into the business? How does it align with the business goals and objectives? The reason for that is very simple, because if you do something that is not in alignment with the organizational values, strategy, and vision, then probably there will be very little interest to invest into this innovation or into this project, despite how cool and exciting it might look like. Then you look into the outcome. I'll jump and skip the enables for the moment. If you look at the outcome, is that ultimately is what change are you trying to introduce? So that's the ultimately what business process, what person or persona will be impacted by the change, and how. It only comes next to say how the technology will come and enable that. So you kind of thinking and balancing your why and what, and only then come to how. And Data Cloud fits into the how pillar, and therefore kind of goes back to the beginning of your Data Cloud project. Should really start with why would you want to make a change, and what outcome would you like to drive an impact, and only then you kind of come in and say, well, is Data Cloud the right product for solving that problem? Does it provide you all the capabilities that are required to achieve that specific objective and outcome and business goal? So that's a big thing, and that really makes that foundation of the entire kind of framework to planning and designing it. And one of the very simple example of the use case that might be sort of considered in the sense, again, because we're not even necessarily looking for technology, but the idea here is, it is an ability to identify new customers that look like our most loyal customers today, decrease the cost per acquisition by 5%. So that's kind of formulating why and what you're trying to achieve with lookalikes and advertising activations. So that's where that draw into technology or capability. I want to be able to create a lookalike audience. I want to be able to advertise to that audience, and then fueled by segment performance, insights, and artificial intelligence. So it's a very simple example of that narrative, but practically that's a really good guideline to start thinking about when you assessing, evaluating the Data Cloud fit for purpose, and when you're thinking about how it's going to be introduced to your business. That's the thinking that ideally you should be following, because it will help you to correctly put together the reasoning, justification, build a business case, and really seek funding within your organization. And again, funding, it is not necessarily just the only thing. You want the people and human resource investment. You want technology support and so forth. Because one big thing about data cloud projects, they are multifaceted and certainly influence broader organization as a result. The goals are important, and they need to be measurable. So one thing that we discovered over the time is there could be, and again, this is traditional consulting 101 when you want your goals to be smart, but one part of that smart is being able to measure the outcome. So in the previous example, you've seen that there was a decrement of lead cost by 5%. So there is a number and you can measure that. And that's ultimately where you want to look into that. But these are the key, I guess, directions and sort of categories of goals where you look into that from the business standpoint of view. Why would the business invest into technology? They would look into increment of the revenue. They would look into reduction of cost. Or there is a newer thing that could be alignment with compliance and quality requirements for the organization. So that's really three key areas. There could be a couple of other sitting on the edges, but majority of the use cases can be drilled down to these categories. You're either impacting the revenue in the positive way, you're reducing the cost and introducing efficiencies to the business. And again, with Data Cloud fueling agentic experiences and really powering up Agentforce in the future, it really leads to reduction of cost in a lot of use cases and scenarios. And compliance and security are pretty big things when it comes up to data. So as you start thinking about business case, the next logical step is really drawing into how do we formulate the use case specifically for Data Cloud. So we think that Data Cloud would be the good tool. How do you assess and evaluate that? So you look into, and I put it into a bit of a reverse order, because traditionally you're presented forward, left to the right. I'm going to try to do a different direction here, and I'm going to take and look into what is the most important thing that you want to achieve with the implementation of Data Cloud. And practically, and it's proven over the long period of time enough to be able to say that you want to look into what actions and automated activities you want to achieve as a result of building up your Data Cloud implementation. If you look into few key themes within Salesforce ecosystem and maybe a little bit beyond, there are really few key areas. Number one is data visualization within the platform. So if you're a Salesforce sales and service and industry cloud user, you'd be familiar with the fact that you've got information that resides within Salesforce itself, within the org, and then all the external data. The ability to bring that external data and visualize it within the flow of work. So you've got these different tabs. You can see that Google Analytics BigQuery as a record list sits in the top right. Then you've got things like lifetime value, propensity to purchase. They are calculated data points or maybe AI model score that comes out of Data Cloud and kind of fills up that customer profile with additional information. So that's one of these big things to sort of say, how can you try to get closer to that single source of truth? Or rather, bring that visualization of the relevant source of truth to the system where your users are effectively interacting with data. Automations and workflows. If you think about the Data Cloud, as I mentioned before, it consolidates information from different sources and different systems. And the great ability today is look and monitor on the data that comes into the platform and initiate business process workflow from that. So in a very simple case could be, we want to create a lead, or we want to score a customer interaction, or create a task, create a follow-up, create an appointment. So these are simple things, but you can extend it as far as you need to. Really, imagination is the boundary here. So that's a big thing to kind of consider. The next big chunk is coming up into the omni-channel activation. So if you're thinking about segment creation, traditionally is a marketing use case, but in some cases you can apply segmentation in the context of not just marketing. You can talk about that a little bit beyond as well. But ultimately thinking about, if we want to take the information, we want to identify certain categories of people, you create a segment, and then you actually act on that segment by sending it to the advertising platform. So similar to a business case where we want potentially to look into the lookalike audiences, that could be one of the approaches to take. And last but not least, there are a couple of options when it comes to AI, fueling up the prompts, providing the data that could be coming up with, from different data systems, coming up from unstructured data, and really coming up from even CRM, to kind of fuel up and contextualize the prompt itself and ground it into the relevant information, as well as help articulate conversations with agents. So all of these different use cases, they're just examples, majority, as I said, within Salesforce ecosystem itself, within the Salesforce platform. But ultimately, these are the things that you should begin with to say what we're trying to introduce, what experience we're trying to change, whether it's for end customer, or whether it's for our employees, for our partners. Where do we see that the data that we want to bring into the platform will effectively make an impact and change something? So these are the starting points. As you take a step back, so you kind of going backwards, as I said, we're working from right to left, not left to right, in the way we're thinking about when the information comes into the platform, you're not just exposing that, and it's not necessarily just one benefit of having Data Cloud connecting all the different data sources, but the idea is you can actually look into employing predictive and generative capabilities. You can analyze the data, you can identify certain insights from this information. So once the information made it to the platform, similar to one of the previous examples was, we're looking into like customer lifetime value calculations, looking into propensity to purchase, looking into engagement score, like some of these different results that come up with either calculated data points, or it's the model that is utilized within the platform to construct the propensity score, or likelihood to purchase, likelihood to transact, ability to predict certain things. What I find powerful is the opportunity, and that was one of the things that we discussed even on the partner advisory board recently with product team, is that the vision of the platform to truly be open-ended, in the sense of providing you an opportunity to bring some of these intelligence and insights from the external systems into the Data Cloud. And it's effectively that build or bring your own models, which is the construct where if you do use today like a SageMaker or Google Vertex AI to build some of these interesting intelligent insights for your business use cases, you don't have to recreate them. You can just connect that model and use it within Data Cloud. Again, connecting to all of these things we just talked about, whether it's a business process, whether it's a trigger, whether it's personalization element within, within the customer details. So, and another option is you can actually create the models from scratch within Data Cloud too. So that ability where you, depending on your different sources where you bring the information, you can then put it into the smarts and say, I'd like to derive and build up an insight right within Data Cloud. You don't have to leave into any other systems. And then ultimately, you kind of go back and say, well, okay, as we building up all of these outcomes, we figure out what action we would like to take, what we want to automate. We establish what information we might need to discover or create and generate within the data cloud, is the next step is really going back into which system will bring the information back to me. And again, here where I left it intentionally without going into different details, because you practically want to know is, there's 200 plus connectors, ability to ingest structured and unstructured data, ability to do zero copy. There's a lot of different opportunities how you can bring and make the integration very light and easy, in the sense of, you don't necessarily have to build it from scratch. There are plenty of connectors, and ultimately today we're even talking about, to the degree opportunity to, quick experiment and test with uploading files from your desktop, which today shouldn't really happen, but still that's one of the opportunities that you can pursue and employ should you need to. So that builds up the entirety of the use case for Data Cloud itself, and to be able to understand, okay, are we on the right track? Are we creating the capability that is going to really enable the use case that we built? Because your business outcome that you're defining should be in alignment with this automation and taking action. So anything to do with Data Cloud should end with an action. If Data Cloud becomes your product that just stores the data alike to any other data solution, data warehouse, data lake, whatever, it just becomes just like a stale data set that's just going to collate yet another system that collates the data, but we're not really doing anything with that. And if you approach the design of the use case following this framework and kind of starting from the right rather than from the left, you really minimize the scope of your integration. You downsize the cost to deliver, because you're specifically, intentionally choosing the data points at the source that will make an impact to your business outcomes, rather than bringing up all the data from different places, connecting and trying to figure out what you want to do with it. So it's a very purposeful approach. It's a very focused approach to how you achieve your outcomes and what the steps should be and how to deliver it. In terms of looking into, this might look a bit confusing, but in a sense, why I put it like how successful mix looks like. These are famous, or reasonably famous now, customer success stories. A few of them, like Play.com and TripADeal, are local to ANZ market. FedEx and Wyndham are more global companies, but ultimately the reason I put them in here, and you can find them on Salesforce website, it's no secret, there's nothing hidden here. If you look into the product mix within their solution stack. So it kind of goes back to the concept of Data Cloud as a standalone product today, and even from the very beginning, never really made sense. The idea for the Data Cloud is the vehicle and ability to accelerate access to data that is spread across the organization, to unify and harmonize that, and really enable the actions across business line applications. So common pattern to me, look up, you've got marketing use cases very commonly coming up. You've got a number of sales and service use cases, which again makes more and more sense, especially in the context of bringing up agentic and AI-led experiences. And then if you look into Wyndham itself, thinking about this is a very, very broad data set that comes up from so many different entities and need to be unified. So there is a complex integration through MuleSoft. There is a Data Cloud piece that kind of brings up all that information together, makes sense. You've got the AI, Einstein AI build up. You've got the visualization and reporting through Tableau, and then Experience Cloud to actually provide business level capabilities. But again, none of these success stories highlights Data Cloud as the only product that people have implemented and businesses have implemented, for the exact same reason. If you start with outcomes in mind, if you begin with your end in mind, you ultimately go back down to say the Data Cloud should only enable me to organize and orchestrate the data flow within all of these different experiences and bring the data from all the different sources in order to achieve that. That's ultimately the goal for doing that. Now, I do want to touch base on a few delivery guidelines, specifically on planning, right? So you kind of define the business goal and objective, you sort of focused on Data Cloud, you look into that and say, okay, yeah, that makes sense. We can now build the use case. As you start preparing for implementation itself, this is the guideline that we shared with all the delivery partners. And to be honest, that I would still stand true to that, because that's how we looked into within carbonx group to deliver solutions. Is you've got 3 distinct phases. So most of the details and the framework that I was discussing with you today sits in the preparation phase. It's really aligning with the vision and strategy, identifying the use cases, prioritizing them. You look into performing readiness assessment within your business, and then formulating the use case, justification from the investment standpoint of view. Again, financial, human resource, technology, and whatnot. Once it gets into the project, there is a very detailed structure, but it's pretty much like the execution and go live. It's relatively easy. So if we're looking into the balance between preparation and implementation, even within implementation itself, the ratio of the consulting, design, and discovery efforts should be at least 60% on the design, discovery, and kind of formulating the solution. And on the rest have to be actual build and execution of deployment. So the more you spend in preparation, the more time you spend in defining your use case, validating them, focusing on tangible outcomes, looking into the goals that are measurable, the easier it gets into the execution. What often could be missed, and it's kind of like not necessarily just a fault from one party and whatnot, it's just not necessarily prioritized enough, is the adoption and sustainment. So it kind of goes back to, as I said, our value proposition as a business. And this is where we really believe there is a good justification for us to help our customers, is figure out how to operationalize the technology that they have. So how do we get all the knowledge that you need in order to be able to run and continuously run the system, to extend that if you need to engage the right technology specialist if you need some technical assistance, but be able to lead it from administrative maintainability as well as operational cycle on your own. That phase as well has to be including the review and adjustment of the strategic roadmap, because your data strategy doesn't end with a single implementation. And one thing I do want to maybe highlight here is data cloud implementation is never stale. It shouldn't be. You traditionally always evolve. Once you get your data actionable, once you see the opportunity, there usually always is the case to extend that, to add a little bit more. But the cycle of all of that is very repetitive. It's very iterative. If you focus on the right scope, if you deliberately and purposely choose the data that fuels up your outcomes, then that entire implementation in the middle becomes super, super easy to do and very easy to achieve. So the pillars for the data strategy, and one of the assessments that you'll have to kind of do as you kind of embarking on the implementation, is looking into people, processes, tools, and technologies within your business, and what information is residing and how people interact with that today, or processes interact with that today, or what tools govern and host the data that you need access to. So this is normally, ideally, should be done before the implementation project. But quite often seems to be brought into implementation projects. So if you are one of the customers on the call today, do acknowledge the fact that this is a discovery / kind of managing your organizational stakeholders to kind of discover and document and identify these processes. If you can do that as a homework before you engage someone to help you with implementation, that usually makes it easier for all parties to kind of achieve the outcomes that you're looking for. The other big thing is, when we're talking about the goals, measurable goals, it is important to do an assessment of a kind. And I know the data cloud pricing has been a point of conversations probably at least last year, if not more than that, as soon as it changed into the consumption-based model. But believe me, there are methods that you can work with in order to estimate what the consumption would look like. And there are different approaches to that. So, like looking into, for example, differentiation between running like a proof of technology, so proof of concept, proof of technology, proof of value, potentially projects. Each of them can help you to determine what might be your consumption model in the future. There is an approach for, and we discussed it a number of times, actually, I think we have an offering for that, for proof of value delivery, to ensure that you, A, verify how the end result actually is enabled through data, and then B, look into what real consumption looks like within your deliberately selected data set. That single approach can effectively, with a very short and brief engagement, enable you and empower you with all the data points needed to justify further investment within the business. So that could be one of the ways to go and say, we want to start light. want to do it quickly, want to look at the results, want to measure them, see the impact, see the cost to deliver, and then build a business case on top of that. I've seen a number of comparison with other different tools, and it's arguable that what is more expensive, less expensive. I usually look into that in simple terms. If you're talking about business value, if you define your goals and if you define your business value altogether, you technically can estimate what the benefit to the business would be in terms of cost saving or profit increase when you achieve your outcomes. Now, if you look at the cost to deliver it, whether it's license, consumption, combination of that, doesn't really matter, you can easily judge that. So if the cost of doing it in Data Cloud is a bit more expensive than other system, but it still is much more affordable comparing to the outcomes you're getting, why bother to try and go up and debate on the fact that you can build your own thing? Like, there are certain use cases where it might be appropriate, but most of the time, a lot of these kind of challenging conversations, they start too early because you don't have enough data points to really justify what could be the investment based on your potential consumption and what is the real value to the business as a result of delivering that solution. So that's mainly a few things to keep in mind. So coming up to the end of, I guess, my presentation, just wanted to do a bit of a summary for those who might not necessarily listen through it, but if you too long didn't listen, didn't read, the framework ultimately, in the way that we sort of formulated it for you, is based on three key steps. Number one is you establish the outcome that is aligned with the business goals, objective, strategy, vision, values. It's like, why are you doing what you're trying to do? Then as you form the outcomes, you define your use cases, you build them up in the right way, but you correctly looking into who will benefit from the solution, where would you source the data to enable that, and how it will actually enable that use case, what measures you need to determine the success of that investment, and then what challenges you might face within your organization. As it kind of goes back into that assessment, you might not have enough people. Some data systems that host the data today that you need could be difficult to access. So a few of these things that just going to come into the mix, but they all come to thinking and planning that. And then doing that assessment within your own organization to look into like people, data, and technology. And data is quite often gets to the point, can you do the data assessment today of what you have in stock? Is it compliant? Is it complete? Is it normalized? Is it denormalized? How many sources you need? Where, like, what information do you even have access to? Do you have data stewards? And I mean, it's a whole big engagement on its own. And again, if you ever need help with things like that, you can always reach out to us to help you out with these type of things. So as we kind of finish up the presentation, a few suggestions where you can take it from here. Number one is I'd like to point people and direct people to something that is publicly available, because you don't have to pay for getting a bit of an information of what can potentially be applicable to you and your business. So Data Cloud product team has invested a fair bit of time throughout the last year and a bit of this year to make that library of use cases available to all customers. So you don't, again, have to engage anyone to try and find what could be that inspirational use case that you want to bring up into your organization. There's quite a lot of the use cases listed there. Again, if you're looking into like sales application, service level application, marketing, agentic and platform, I think there are even filters there. So it's a really good library. If you spend a few days just going up and trailing through that, I'm sure you'll find few good starting points to kind of draw up and start defining your specific use case. I would certainly encourage doing that. And then something that we define in a slightly different format, but it's sort of a bit extended to really align to the framework that I was talking about before, is how to put together your plan. So as you start building up the use cases, especially if you're looking into engaging someone to help you, like an external consulting company, to help to deliver the projects, these are the things that it's worthwhile thinking before you get that engagement on the way. If you can fill up these sort of approach and this type of format in terms of your business case, in terms of your data cloud scenario, in terms of impact and goals and all the other things, it will accelerate the entire engagement for you in terms of effort and time, because that's where a lot of consulting time needs to be spent to help you to kind of reframe and put it all together. In some cases, you might need help. So again, don't hesitate to reach out for it. we're around. Just, you can always reach out to us to do that, but ask your teams within the business, because technically, when you think about Data Cloud, and when you start putting together a bit of a strategy and adoption roadmap, ideally, you'd want other business stakeholders to be involved, so it becomes a bigger project altogether for everyone. All right, I've seen a few questions. So again, as I said, if you need any help, if you need any assistance with that, reach out. Let me see, what do we have on the Q&A? All right, I'll start with all this first. So Elliot asked, how important do you think documentation in the implementation project? Should teams invest time upfront in authoring a comprehensive blueprint before implementation, or do you recommend diving straight into configuring a platform based on the defined use cases? Look, I guess this is very usual and common use case, because not a lot of I guess customers would want to spend money for documentation without realizing the value of that upfront. But the easier it could be, the better. I mean, I like the simplistic approach to that. I still think if the use case is documented, if the scenarios are all listed out, if you know the goals, if you know objectives, you still need one layer to translate it into what does it mean in Data Cloud terms. And I feel it needs to be captured in some way. The comprehensiveness of that particular documentation is really up to the judgment of consultants, but I would play safer on the fact of I document that enough to be able to say, here's the data model that we're going to be establishing that. Here's the use case reference to what we achieve or what we're trying to achieve. And then at the very least, the integration data points to say, where do you source that information from? So I certainly flag on that. And one was, would you recommend implementing Data Cloud for an organization that has no Salesforce product? That's a fantastic use case. So as an example, CDP scenarios where you ingest the customer data from like e-commerce platforms, CRM platforms, and then activate to other vendors like Brace or digital marketing solutions. To be honest, that was a very debatable kind of point, because we spoke about that internally within Salesforce. But today, coming out and kind of like no longer having to defend the product line of site, I'll be honest, it feels that it makes much more sense if you are operating within the Salesforce stack. Like today, yes, you have an options to integrate with other systems as a integrate out with the other systems. But it doesn't feel like it's justifiable, because it's sort of like trying to squeeze a product rather than trying to look into the comprehensive solution, and Data Cloud is part of that product. That's my kind of brief estimation of that. I certainly found it's much easier and much faster to implement, and you can see the results and realize the outcomes if you are within Salesforce environment context, and especially if you're talking about like agentic experiences. It feels, to be honest, much more natively geared towards that. Josephine was mentioned. So Snowflake recently announced their own Data Cloud and AI model. How would you position recommendations for Salesforce Data Cloud going forward, considering those new features? Look, I feel like this is a very common thing to sort of to lay back, is like the technology today is going to evolve much faster than it used to be in the past. And what I found maybe in the last 5 years or so, a lot of vendors out there, they monitor almost what Salesforce does and then replicate it and apply it within their business, within their domain, right? Because it sort of makes sense. Like if you consider Snowflake as one of the vendors who heavily focus on data management, on data operations, it would make certain sense that they will have a similar capability enabled, and they would want to integrate it in a similar way. And maybe that's where, if you looking outside of Salesforce, if you've got kind of like composable stack where you've got different systems, different tools, different vendors to provide you capabilities, that could make a bit more sense. Practically, it kind of goes back into what Snowflake truly does. I'll be honest, I haven't had an assessment of what are the true capabilities of in terms of their own Data Cloud and how much it really enables a similar experience. I found that few vendors with some of the recent functional announcements sort of align to certain features, but I like to look at that holistically, because what I found in the past were discussions on a single feature, a single capability within the scope of the broader use case, and that led to sort of say like, yeah, there might be a bit of a winning point of view on that, but if you put it into perspective of the entire life cycle and the entire use case, does it make sense? And think of that. You've got different vendors, you've got different tools, you've got different utilizations, you've got different integration needs, and different user capabilities. Again, so it really is about how user-friendly the data cloud could be within Snowflake as opposed to Salesforce, and what capabilities will truly enable through that. So Adam, I know you raised a hand. Let me just answer one more question from Elliot, and I'll let you jump in. So regarding licensing itself, if you're only implementing Data Cloud for Agentforce use cases, for example, storing unstructured data files, and you use vector database for the search, is there a light edition of Data Cloud without identity resolution, data transforms, and calculated insights, and so forth? It's a really good question. So there is no really definition of like lighter editions and lighter options, with limiting a lot of these capabilities, but you should not need to use the features that you don't need. So the way to, I guess, address that is practically majority of the customer editions now should include Data Cloud as a license for free. And that feels like this is the direction that Salesforce took deliberately. I remember having these conversations when I was part of the Salesforce team. It was a deliberate decision to follow that path because consumption-based product makes sense when you pay for what you truly use. So if you don't use identity resolution, if you don't unify the data, and if you've got just documents coming in and they're fueling specific scenarios, you should not need to be paying for identity resolution. And that's the good side of Data Cloud that I find, like, again, taking away the price, whether it's competitive enough or not, that's a different story. But practically, if you're not doing something, you're not paying for it. And I think that sort of leads to the point of the license per se becomes almost like an abstract concept. Is it enabled in your org or not? And that's as much as you want to really focus and think about that. Adam, do you want to unmute yourself and ask the question?
Yeah, thanks, Vlad. Great presentation. I just wanted to sort of relate it to the cost effectiveness angle. When it makes total sense identifying use cases that are going to get a return on investment, when you're trying to identify those use cases, and I'm not sure how applicable this is, which is why I'm asking, is there complexity around the amount of data it will take to service the use case itself? So, for example, there might be a great use case, but you have to do 3 different connections and import a bunch of data and you utilize consumption. Is that a factor when trying to work out where to start?
Yeah, it certainly is. It kind of goes back, and I guess I didn't really dive into the details because it's almost like a topic of its own conversation and its own presentation. But when you looking at the estimation of consumption, because it needs to come back to the use case value benefit versus the investment analysis. So if you're looking into, to your point, and I'll take an example, the customer with maybe 15 years worth of historical data that they want to bring into the platform, and part of that comes up from an e-commerce system, part of that comes up from a data warehouse, and there's like an ERP-like environment. So 3 different data sources, you want to bring them together. And if you start looking into evaluating the use case, and what they're trying to do is kind of almost like build up a bit of a customer lifetime value over the period of time. It's like, okay, the benefit of building up that index with the fact that you can achieve that, but with the cost to do that and build up the end result, kind of goes, well, how this particular result will impact your business in either decreasing overall cost, getting more revenue, or adhering to security and policies and needs. That's why, like, when I look into the justification, you absolutely need to do an initial estimation. You might be a bit wrong. That's absolutely fine, because there's one concept that I remember we were discussing with Mehmet at some point in time, who is my colleague for Data Cloud community group. If you just run an interview and ask customers, or if you're looking into like implementation based on the interview of like, how many records do you think you will get? You probably might get a very inaccurate estimation. So you do need to do a bit of audit to truly understand the impact, the potential impact. And that was part of that assessment framework that needs to be done before implementation, because you want to put the numbers more realistically on the table to say what would be the cost to deliver that use case. So again, not going into license, and you're not looking into just a single ingestion of the data. You're looking into if you're going to ingest it, you're going to store it, you're going to process that periodically. How often it really depends. And when you start projecting it within that particular frame of thought, then you actually get to the realistic consumption model. Again, you might hit and miss a bit, but the accuracy here becomes much more closer to reality. And it is required because, again, to the point, one of the sort of negative implementations could be is where if you haven't made that initial investment to assess and evaluate your use case, you're ultimately coming up with a big bill. And we've seen it through a number of customers where they just said, look, it's becoming too expensive. You go, yeah, because you haven't really assessed the cost of doing that versus what's the business outcome, like what's the uplift on the business side. If you've never done that, no. A couple of cases where similar story has been achieved through like that short proof of value implementation, where you effectively build a small, and you kind of very deliberately guiding customer on how much data you ingest, what you kind of process, and kind of building up the result, and then looking into saying, we can now look at the actual consumption to project what the cost would be over the course of the year, for example. And then you, again, align back to the business benefit. So that initial investment could be quite affordable to any good business. In a sense, if you're considering to invest into data cloud, you're not looking into spending on the short amount of like $5,000 or $10,000. It's probably higher than that, reasonably higher than that. So spending initial, I don't know, like 5 to 10% of the potential cost of delivery and usage into initial evaluation to be realistically aligned could be a good way to really build the business justification for further investment, or, to be honest, identify the fact that this is not going to be profitable, so forget about it and move on.
So that means then, so that might sort of tie into what Elliot was saying with the depth of the documentation. You would have incorporate an evaluation component, and that evaluation is an investment in itself.
Absolutely. And again, it goes back to, so we kind of discussing between us, like we are implementing partners and consultants. If you think about a few people on the call who are representing customers themselves, they might be doing that documentation themselves. So when they thinking of that, that's part of their definition and design of like, okay, I do need to understand where do I get the data from, how much it's stored, and putting it all together into some kind of tangible format that you can work with. I mean, today documentation becomes less and less of a concern per se in how pretty it needs to be or how detailed it needs to be. But you kind of need to have a framework to what do I need to capture. And I think that's where the difference and balance of how detailed it needs to come down to, because if you're just designing a use case and you kind of trying to put together justification, I would not necessarily focus on building up the data dictionary per se for implementation just yet. This is where I would kind of delegate that kind of activity towards the cycle when we start implementing. That's when you can start detailing like what fields coming, what the data types and formats and whatnot. For the initial kind of preparation phase, it should be more than enough to say, there's a custom profile information that's stored across 2 or 3 different systems. This is what is required for me to put together for that initial use case. The rest of the stuff that is in the systems, I don't even need to worry about that because it's not of interest to me.
Makes sense. Thanks, Vlad.
Yeah, sure. Well, if anyone else have any other questions, let me try to do quickly, prompt another poll for an assessment of your attention as we're coming down to the end of the session. So if you feel like recalling what was the percentage of business leaders in Australia who feel that their data should provide more value, see if you can remember that. Make your vote. Put it in the chat, or we'll open up that triangle thing and look into the polls, see if you remember that correctly. But as we progress forward, so if you do have any further questions, I think we've got a couple of minutes left, so feel free to just unmute yourself and chime in, or put it in the Q&A/chat. I'm going to check to make sure that we do have anything on chat. No. So that's all good. And if anything else, if you'd like to have a conversation, if you'd like to reach out, you always feel free to just connect with us on LinkedIn, send us an email, just drop a message, and we'll get back to you. So feel free to always connect with us for any guidance. I can see that we've got pretty attentive audience, which I didn't doubt for any second. Yeah, it is 94% if you answer that. So fabulous. I'll end the poll. I think we are way through that. Thank you very much for joining today. I hope you find the session useful and practical. And yeah, if you feel like connecting with us after the fact, please do so. But until next time, when something else comes up into our schedule, we'll certainly share it and advertise it on social channels and LinkedIn and so forth. So stay tuned. Thank you very much for the time today, and look forward to seeing you at some point in time. Thanks. Daniel, did you raise the hand or no? Probably not. Jumped off.